Okay, right. We're ready to go?
Okay.
Okay, we're live. Okay, good evening, everybody. I hope you've all tuned in okay to the link to the YouTube live stream. This is our second ArchSoc talk over this format, and hopefully we won't have any of the bugs we had with the last time. I think there's something wrong with my audio, so I'm just going to adjust that slightly. Okay, hopefully that's a bit better. Okay, right. I think I've just given that enough time. I'm hopefully getting the feedback right on the stream. I'm trying to listen to it at the same time. Okay, so this evening we have Michael Chazan from the University of Toronto, and it's about just after noon in Toronto. He's going to talk to us about his research at Wonderwerk Cave, and we've got a wonderful presentation up ahead. Wonderwerk Cave, as many of you know, is a site in the Northern Cape near Kuruman, and it's got the full sequence, full Stone Age sequence, and it's a very special site. So it's great to hear what the latest research is at Wonderwerk. So I'm looking forward to this talk. So for those of you who haven't attended the YouTube live presentations up to this point, there's a little chat box on the right-hand side of the presentation. And if you're logged into your Google account or a YouTube account, Google account is the same, it'll work for YouTube. You can actually enter queries or comments or questions onto the chat box, and I'll take those during the talk. And at the end, we will then give those over to Michael to answer during the Q&A session at the end. Other than that, so if you can't enter anything into the chat box, it's because you aren't logged in and you're unable to enter anything in there. You may need to sign out and sign into your Gmail account. So, Michael, I think that's all we from the prep. I think it's up to you. I think your screen share is turned off at the moment, so if you could just re-enable that.
Oh, really?
I'll just give that a second. Okay, I'm just going to remove the current window we've got for that, and then if you could reshare,
is that
great?
That's
yeah,
working?
I can add that on. Yeah, and then I'm just going to resize that. That's great. Wonderful. Okay, and then let's bring that to the front. Great. Okay, that's a bit big. 1 second. Okay, great. Okay, my duties are done till the end. You can take over, and the presentation's all in your hands.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I'm going to try to keep myself to about 35, 40 minutes. Good luck. I tend to talk a lot, so we'll see if I can keep that under control. This is an amazing experience, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity and really honored to be speaking in this forum. It's just strange to be. I've never felt more isolated in my life, yet here I'm able to speak from my home to people across the globe. This is the first time in 15 years that I haven't traveled to South Africa to get a second winter. I kind of am. In Canada, we have what are called the snowbirds. Elderly people tend to fly down to Florida for the winter. I'm a reverse snowbird. Once it gets warm here, I fly to South Africa for the Northern Cape winter as well. So this year is quite an exception, and I'm glad to be able to be present, at least virtually. So I'm going to talk about the project as a whole for a little bit, then I'll talk about the early Stone Age sequence, particularly focusing on the evidence for the use of fire at the cave, and then I'll shift to this question about early precursors of symbolic behavior. So let me get right into it by indicating the nature of this project. This is a hugely interdisciplinary and collaborative project with people from really all over the world, particularly South Africa, Israel, and Canada, I'd say are the main countries represented. This is a very early iteration of our team. Um, it, it's gone through many various groupings. I just want to point out here Francis Thackeray, who's one of the excavators of Wonderwerk, as well as the rest of our team. Maybe some of you recognize yourselves there. This is a more recent iteration of our team. We now are an excavation team. We've moved from intensive scientific sampling, and we have a core team that's there all season, and then people come and go to do their more, kind of detailed work. And I just want to point out a few of the team members who are really critical. Candace Kupowitz, Sarah Rhodes, and Michaela Ecker. The three of them more or less run the logistics of the excavation. Candace does work on the geoarchaeology and the early traces of fire, graduate student at Simon Fraser University. Sarah Rhodes is a postdoc now with Tübingen University, and she does work on the later Stone Age sequence and on the microfauna as well. And Michaela Ecker developed the database for the project and did her dissertation at Oxford on the paleoclimates of Wonderwerk Cave, and is really, the three of them are really essential to the project, and I just want to recognize that. The project directors are myself and Leora Horwitz, who's not in this picture, as well as Francesco Berna, who's just to the, I guess, your left from Sarah, has also served as co-director for the project. We also work intensively with the community in Kuruman. This is one of the most joyful days at Wonderwerk Cave. We had a community day last year organized by the workshop Kokasi in Kuruman. And this is just an area of work on the cave that is building and developing, and very exciting part of working at Wonderwerk Cave is being in the world of contemporary Kuruman. I'm just going to try to get this fan to stop making noise. And all of our work at Wonderwerk Cave is in collaboration with the McGregor Museum, who's actually the landowner for the small parcel of land that the cave sits on. And I want to recognize in particular David Morris, who's really sacrificed a great deal of his time and energy to help make this happen, and in general towards the protection and enhancing research on the prehistory of the Northern Cape in general. But of course, Wonderwerk Cave can't exist without Peter Beaumont. There were earlier excavators, I'll show a picture in a few minutes, from Milan and Wells, who excavated with the University of California expedition. But Peter, who died a few years ago now, is truly just a formidable figure, I think is the way to put it. But almost all of the work that we're doing in the Northern Cape is following in Peter's footsteps. Here you see him triumphantly grasping a hand axe he's just excavated at Katu Pan, another site that we work on as well. And his excavations at Wonderwerk really gave us the ability to approach the site. We spent about a decade working on his collections, examining the sections he left behind, initially with him, and subsequently he wasn't able to work with us anymore. But his work is incredible, and it's just not even possible to even think about Wonderwerk Cave being recognized for what it is without Peter's decades of dedication, work, industriousness, and bringing people in, including ourselves. He's the person who brought us to Wonderwerk Cave. The project, as I said, is interdisciplinary. We're one of these projects that's very sold on the idea of high precision. High precision makes sense at Wonderwerk because this is not a site that's at risk. This is a site that I hope archaeologists work on for hundreds, and if I'm truly optimistic, thousands of years into the future. It's a unique repository of the distant past. There's no reason to hurry. So we excavate in quarter meter units. We run everything through a flotation machine. That's the device up in the center, which I think we're one of the, I think we're the first team in South Africa to do that, which allows us to recover everything. It's a little bit laborious. This machine's very nice for the Northern Cape because it recovers and recycles all the water. So you minimize water usage. Francesco really, Bernard, you see on the right side of the screen, really pioneered for us the development of a lab on the site, that there's not a separation between laboratory analysis and fieldwork. He set up a thin sectioning lab, FTIR lab on site, and that's something that we're quite committed to in an ongoing way. Of course, there is a tremendous amount of lab work that goes on subsequently, things that can't be done in the field. But what we're trying to do is foster an idea that an excavation is kind of an outdoor laboratory and that you don't separate your excavating team from your research team. We don't just package up samples and send them off. We bring the people who are doing the analysis onto the site. They're fully members of our collaboration. And together we try to understand how to recover material better and also to kind of get a holistic perspective. Our hope is that we'll also be able to innovate that way, develop new methods that can be used over time. But the main message, I'd say, Peter was really a pioneering figure, so he was excavating quite rapidly. We're not in a pioneering phase already. Thanks to his work, we know this is an amazing place. Our work is really very targeted and very, very slow, that we're really trying to pull out the maximum information. We tend to target areas for excavation that are at risk of collapse, so we're further minimizing our impact. So let's get to the site itself. I love using this map because it's quite an early map from the 1830s. Yeah, this map is from the 1830s, and so you all know South Africa. This isn't a Canadian audience, but um, I like this map because it shows how in the 19th century, most of what was known was the area along the coast, which you can see here is very well mapped out. Whereas in the interior is far less known. But if you look, the area in that rectangle is relatively well mapped compared to the rest of the interior. That we're following a path that's been traveled by in the colonial period for a long time. And we're also very aware of the local populations that were already there. So this has a very fraught history, this whole area. And the more years that I work at Wonderwerk, the more interested I get in that history. That it's kind of a weird thing when you're working on things that are millions of years old. You kind of get distanced from the local history. I think that's different from people who are working on, say, later Stone Age material, perhaps. But over the years, we've really come to see that this all integrates together, the study of the distant past, the study of the recent past, and it's all kind of trying to grapple with and appreciate and uh, get knowledge out of this really incredible place. The reason why this area is relatively well mapped, it was home of the Moffat Mission and the London Missionary Society. Again, this map is from 1836. So this is a relatively, this was already in the 19th century, early 19th century, a relatively well-known area. Our team works across the region. We do a bit of work at Kopi on the Vaal River. Ironically, there we do not work on the early Stone Age. That's Kathy Kuman's team from Wits. Does that work? We work on the 19th century occupation of the site when it was a mining town, and we do that in collaboration with the Saul Plaatje University, where we run a field school with their students. Um, Beyond Wonderwerk, in the up north, we work in Katu as well. where we work on a series of sites that are known as the Katu complex. Given the time limitations, I won't touch on that. And we've also done geological work at the manganese mine in Mamatuan, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. What I love about this map is you'll see the inset, which is this box. Let me just get a pointer here. Uh, this box over here, that's this cutout here. And you can see that the cave is already marked. I'm pretty sure that's Wonderwerk. It's possible that that would be Busmansgat, which is this deep sinkhole, but the morphology of the road is wrong for Busmansgat. The Busmansgat should be on the other side of the road. I think this is Wonderwerk saying that already travelers in the 1830s were recognizing it. Interestingly, archaeologically, I think we're finding occupation of the site in the 1830s and in the 19th century before eventually the farmer who settled the cave and the surrounding farm um, came into the picture. So that's quite an interesting story here, what's going on at Wonderwerk Cave during the early colonial period when Europeans are just moving into the area. Um, yeah, so that's kind of a historical side point that people have. When people say, when did people discover Wonderwerk Cave? The answer is people have always known about Wonderwerk Cave. And our sense is that it's always been a significant place, or at least for a very long time. Okay, in terms of a more regular map, my pointer is fortuitously right on Cape Town. So if you want to drive to Wonderwerk in the winter, you'll go over the mountains, and if you're very lucky, you'll hit some snow. It's about a 12-hour drive. If you're me, it's about 14 hours because I'm known as a very slow driver. And it's up towards the border with Botswana. And then just more normal maps showing the location of Kimberley and Kuruman, and then Canteen Kopi is CK on the Vaal River. You go up the Gap Escarpment, and then Wonderwerk, which I apologize, I know I pronounced terribly for Afrikaans, but what can you do? And then Katupan is on the other side of the Kuruman Hills. In terms of environment, we're in and I lost some of my annotations here. We're in this green is the savanna environment. But what's quite interesting to us is we're near the juncture between the Nama Karoo and the grassland environments. We're also quite firmly within the SRZ, the summer rainfall zone, but we have some senses that that's moved over time through the Pleistocene. And that comes out of Michaela Ecker's work that I won't be talking about so much today. And I mentioned before Mamatuan, the Mamatuan mine, where Ari Matmon and his team has identified a large body of water that existed about 1 million years ago. But really interesting. So this was a wet area, Katu, Mamatuan, and Wonderwerk as well. It was not dry like it is today. And even when we say dry, well, a lot of you will know the region, but it's a savanna dry. We're not talking kind of blowing dunes or whatnot. Um, what's really interesting that Ari's work at Mamatuan has also found that there was a drainage that crossed the Kalahari 1 million years ago. This is now a buried drainage system, which others have reconstructed, but he's found good evidence for that. So we have to think about this as a very different place from what it is today, or what our imagination of it is today. A much wetter place, a place that was much more welcoming to early human occupation. Okay, so this is driving up to Wonderwerk. There's quite a bit of construction around the site. There's a guardhouse and there are a few chalets that are not operative at the moment for rent. They were built by the municipality, and now they're used by the people who live at the cave to guard it and to show around visitors. It is a tourist site. We have gotten rid of this lamp, I'm happy to say, but it is open to visitors, but weirdly not on weekends. One of the great frustrations of life is trying to get a setup so that the site will be open on the day that people can actually visit, and someday we'll get there. These are all the back dirt from Peter's excavations, so it's not that there was a terrace on the site. I said I would mention Milan and Wells. This is a picture from Milan work at the cave, and this is to prove to you that it's a big cave. You can drive two vehicles into it, and I promise you, we don't do that, okay? That is not part of our research methodology. But it's quite an evocative picture and giving you a sense of the volume of this cave. And then, as we'll see, it extends very far into the mountain. Geologically, the Kuraman Hills are very ancient structures that go back to the Precambrian period. So these are over 2 billion year old rocks. And we're looking at a succession between dolomites and overlying banded ironstone. All of these are rocks deposited below the ocean bed. And the differences in composition have to do with shifts in the Earth's atmosphere and the amount of oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. This is just a detail of what the banded ironstone looks like, with alternating bands of silica-rich and iron-rich mineralogy. And the banded ironstone is the dominant raw material for making stone tools. This is what you see when you go into Wonderwerk Cave now, at least when we're working there. So you can see we have our total station set up to the right of what's a massive stalagmite. The site, I like to say, looks like a subway tunnel because it does. It's not straight the whole way around. There's a little bit of a turn to the right, but it's a big cave. You know, it's not one of these caves where you crawl in and it's all quite constrained. It's really a massive structure. The stalagmite, of course, forms from water dripping through the overlying dolomite, carrying calcium carbonate. It goes back about 35,000 years. It's been studied in terms of climate change by George Brook um, from Georgia, and I've become quite interested in this thing for some weird reasons. One thing that strikes me about it is right now, if you wanted to damage it, it'd be a lot of work. It's a massive, you can see it's a massive growth. But the site was occupied through much of the time that this stalagmite was forming. And what puzzles me is why people left it alone. In order for this to grow, it means to some extent it's either growing during hiatus as an occupation, or people are leaving it alone and kind of saying, okay, we're going to let this stalagmite grow. There are stalagmites all along the walls of the cave. It's not the only one, but it's a weirdly well-centered stalagmite. And I've begun to wonder whether that's not in part the result of human action or inaction, of not tearing this thing down. Because we do know that for later Stone Age people, and I think this goes well into the 19th century, and in fact continues today in terms of the way that people from Kuraman relate to this place, this was a powerful, special place. And we know that in large part because of the rock art that's on the walls, and there are various kinds of rock art. It's easy to overlook the rock art at times because it's dispersed and it was badly damaged. You can see here that there's a bit of graffiti. It was badly damaged by graffiti. There was then a repainting project which hasn't survived terribly well. So in places the rock art's a bit mottled, but these examples, as you can see, are quite clear. There are a range of geometric forms, but also representations of a range of animals, an elephant, some buck, and some birds here. And then this, which seems to be a half animal, half human figure, is really unique kind of painting within the corpus at Wonderwerk. And the wall painting has been a subject of long-term study by David Morris as part of his overall work on the rock art of the Northern Cape and the Karoo. Okay, so moving forward, I want to talk about the excavations in the front part of the cave. This is excavation 1, which is right behind the stalagmite. And this is the stalagmite here. Thanks to the Zamani team at University of Cape Town, run by Heinz Reuter and his colleagues, we have these incredible views. So this is based on a 3D scan of the cave done last year. It's a second generation 3D scan. And what we can see here is the back of the stalagmite. We're basically standing in an impossible place. We're in the rock of the mountain looking down into the cave. There is no way to get this view in person. But what you can see here is there's a big excavated area, and then there's a deeper sounding. The big excavated area is where both Francis and Anne Thackeray, I'm sorry, and Peter Beaumont excavated the later Stone Age. The deeper sounding is where first Milan and then Peter explored the earlier Stone Age, and that's what I'm going to focus on. Here's a view of the profile in the main excavation one area. And you can see these hundreds and hundreds of yellow tags and these tubes. And we've sampled the living daylights out of this section, trying to understand geological formation and most critically, the age of these deposits. This is an early version. We have a revision of this in press, but for our purposes, none of that affects things terribly much. What we can see here is in the blue and the red, we're seeing shifts in the Earth's magnetic field. The yellow are dates based on cosmogenic burial age dating. This is a method that measures the amount of time that a sediment has been shielded from cosmic radiation. When a grain of sand from the Kalahari blows into the cave, it is then shielded, and you start to get a differential decay of isotopes of beryllium and aluminum. Very smart people, particularly Ari Matmon on our team, can calculate that difference to give an age since the shielding has taken place. Combining these together, and I should say the paleomag work was done first by the late Chagai Ron and subsequently his student Ron Shar, both from the Hebrew University, have taken on that work. Basically, what we're able to see is that this lowest level of the site, stratum 12, fits around 2 million, a little younger than 2 million years ago. Stratum 10 fits roughly about 1 million years ago. And we're revising that a little bit younger, but not by a lot. So that's what I want you to hold on to. Is stratum 12, the bottom, is about 2 million years ago. Stratum 10 is about 1 million years ago. And the basis for that is this combination of cosmogenics and paleomagnetic dating. So what do we find in the bottommost levels? This has been a real shock to me. I never worked in Oldowan material. And my picture was always early human industries should be massive and crude. They should just be these big boulders that Homo erectus would take around and smash things with. So we started going through the material from Peter's excavations, and then we did a little bit of a re-excavation ourselves with kind of finer recovery. And what I was finding are things that are unquestionably flakes and cores that are about 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters in size. These are deliberately done. There's no question that this is their material. This is human-made material. It's deposited at very low energy. There's nothing that would have broken it up in this kind of way. They're preferentially using chert in these levels, which comes in small packages. But it still bothers me. What are they doing with these 1 centimeter in size flakes? Maybe all they're doing is trying to make these things that I say are cores, but maybe they're actually the tools. What really bugs me is how did they not lose these things? You know, we're excavating and I have to remember to put them in a bag and tag them in that. How would a early Homo erectus make these objects, then hold on to them to use them? What is the function of them? What's the advantage of such small objects? It could be that there are larger objects that we just haven't found. Our assemblage is relatively small, but small objects are found in other Oldowan contexts, notably at Sterkfontein in South Africa. But they're kind of a part of early human behavior we tend not to think a lot about is why were they doing this? And this is not unique to Wonderwerk, but it's still really surprising and pretty interesting. We also get extinct creatures. Our fauna tends to be very fragmented. throughout the sequence. This is work by the late James Brink, who is a tremendous loss to our team and to South Africa in general, um, and Leora Horwitz. They worked together on piecing together this sample of an extinct muskox, an ovis called Macapania, and this fits well with the date of about 2 million years ago. Following up the sequence, we find the first things that look vaguely like hand axes coming in somewhere between 1.78 and 1 million years ago. We can't be very precise about that, and we only have a couple stone tools for this time period. Things really get going in stratum 10 when we get hand axes that are still crudely made, and they're about 1 million years ago, so we can say that with confidence. But what's really interesting about stratum 10 is that in this Acheulean context, this early Acheulean context, the hand axes still are not very advanced in their technology. We find the early traces of fire. So I'm going to be showing you this red box. What's inside the red box there is this whole area here. So we're looking at a small part of the profile as a whole. You can see the scale here is 10 centimeters. Okay. And this is work by Francesco Berna and Paul Goldberg. This is that box is down here. And this is a slide that they took. This is the method called micromorphology, where you take a block of sediment out, you embed it in plastic resin. You can then cut a slide for looking at under a microscope. And this is the slide that fits in here. Notice how our scale had shifted and we're zooming in more. Here, that's your 10 centimeter scale. Up here, we're zooming in further, and this is a 1 centimeter scale. We're looking at this tiny part of this slide, which is a tiny part of this section, which is a tiny part of the section as a whole. We're kind of zooming down, 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 and finally we're going to go into these boxes here, where what Francesco and Paul found were traces of wood ash. Together with that, they found bone that when it's checked with FTIR, Fourier-Transformed Infrared Spectroscopy, it's burnt. So there's clear in situ evidence of burning. Moreover, it seems clear based on the blocky morphology of this ash that it wasn't blown in from outside the cave. We're over 30 meters from the cave entrance, so we're pretty secure that in fact we're talking about fires that took place inside the cave. Moreover, when we go back to look at the stone tools, we find that they're not stone tools, but rocks in the collection with this kind of moonscape morphology of what we call podlids. And when we did experiments of burning similar rocks, we found that this is equivalent to what you get when you burn something to about 500 to 750 degrees. It fits quite nicely, our experimental to the archaeological samples. When Francesco went back to the fauna and tested it for FTIR of burning, this is from the collections, not from the thin section. He also finds burning. This is based on the peaks over here. There are peaks that indicate burning. And Marion Bamford, in looking at the botanical remains, finds not clearly charred material, but the plants that could have served as fuel. These aren't plants that would provide large fires. They would burn off relatively rapidly, nor do we yet at this stage have clear hearths, big burning structures. What we seem to have is intermittent fires that took place in the cave in clear association with human activity. What people were doing, why they were doing that. Were they setting their fires? Were they carrying fire into the cave? Were they cooking food, like Richard Wrangham would argue? What is this evidence of fire? It means that humans are in association with fire 1 million years ago. That is pretty clear. But what is that association? That's a big question. And that's what our new excavations are partly trying to get at. What I'm to focus on here is what we call here the bench area, which is in stratum 12, which is one of the areas we wanted to explore because this was a bench that Peter hadn't excavated, so we could get directly to open up a small horizontal area of the older one, 2 million year old occupation. because Yolanda Fernandez Halvo, our microfauna specialist, had identified burnt microfauna in this level, and Francesco then also identified burnt macrofauna, large bones, the bones of large animals. So this is what the excavation looks like. We work here in quarter meter or eighth of meter units. Everything is plotted in place. We're taking here micromorphology samples as we go. Everything is floated. We're trying to recover everything and map out the use of fire in this 2 million-year-old context. That's work in progress. I can't report on the results at this point, but we're convinced that we have evidence for fire 2 million years ago. What we want to understand is, what is the distribution of that? Can we identify a fireplace? What was the temperature of the burning, its length, its duration, etc.? So that's kind of one of our exciting new directions. The other direction that I've been focused quite a bit on is the later part of hand axe production. Stratum 10 is about 1 million years ago, but we continue to have about 1.5 meters of deposit of Acheulean industries, and we get more beautiful hand axes, if you will, where the technology includes working more deeply into the rock, creating more symmetrical pieces. And we want to know how old that is and how long it lasts. And this is a piece from our excavations, a hand axe we recovered in 2018. And you can see that it still has a speleothem, a cave deposit adhering to it. Our policy is not to clean any of these rocks. They've been scanned with neutron tomography at NEXA so that we can get a 3D image without cleaning them. There are two reasons for that. We hope that we can use this material for dating, perhaps using uranium thorium or uranium lead. But I also have the hunch that these may also be able to tell us something about how the tools were used. That we basically have a sealed off surface that's been sealed off for hundreds of thousands of years. And by leaving that stuff adhering to the surface, we can wait until we have the appropriate methods to try to look at what are the residues or micro residues on the surface of the piece in a sealed context. So we've been very careful on that front. And that's something we want to look at going forward. Getting at this problem has required opening up a relatively large excavation area of about 3 by 2 meters. For us, that's very big. And we have to work through very complex levels that are 19th century occupation, some disturbed materials, and some later Stone Age materials. It would be great to just be able to remove the disturbed materials, but there's no way to do that, knowing in advance that it's actually disturbed. So everything has to be mapped, and this is just going to take us years of time whenever we're able to go back. And then in the distance, you can see it looks like it's the same elevation, which it is, but it's a much later period of time. The sediment sloped downward a bit towards the cave entrance. And there is the excavations that Sarah Rhodes is running, looking at very, very detailed stratigraphy of the later Stone Age with the main goal of creating a better chronology and understanding more about climate change through this critical time period of the Holocene. Okay, I have violated my promise to you in terms of time already, but I'll try. I'll try to be quick. I want to turn from the front of the cave very briefly to the back of the cave. So Wonderwerk is 140 meters from the entrance to the back. It's truly spectacular. And there's archaeology the whole way. Much of the middle part of the cave we really hardly begun to explore. The back of the cave is what Peter called excavation 6, and he did a rather large excavation there. We have not excavated yet because there's not a lot of material left. So we want to be very careful that before we do any excavation, that we fully know what our goals are and we fully map out the minimal kind of disturbance that to make, and also figure out how to preserve these things for the long term, because this is an amazing archaeological context. The first question we had when we started is, well, maybe the back of the cave here is the entrance, another entrance. And so maybe there's archaeology back there because we have a buried entrance to the surface. So Heinz Reuter's team took their scan, and actually Stephen Walker, who used to live in Cape Town, did this laborious hand-done map, topographic map of the hill. We could now do that with a drone in about 2 or 3 hours. But God bless him, Stephen, spent a good 4 or 5 days mapping it out, and it's really more than good enough for our needs. And then Heinz was able to glue them together. And what we can see is here's the topographic line for the front of the cave, and then the mountain is going up, 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 up. This is the center of the mountain, and the back of the cave is at quite a high thickness of the overhanging rock. It's not a buried entrance. If there's another entrance, it's still 100 meters from the back of the cave. This was the back of the cave 500,000 years ago when we think people were visiting it. Between 500,000 and 300,000 years ago, let's be honest, we have relatively poor control. So 500,000 to 300,000 years ago, this would be a period where you're moving towards the emergence of modern humans, but it's actually a period for which we have no good fossils. You have people going all the way to the back of the cave to do things. Why? I mean, hiding from lions, I always say, is a bad idea because the lion will just wait out front until you get hungry. And they're coming with objects that they leave behind. These include stone tools, some of which, like the ones on the left, are mundane, normal, functional stone tools that typologically belong to the fuller-smith industry, which is transitional between the early Stone Age and the Middle Stone Age, and the dates that we have put it somewhere between 500 and 300,000 years ago. Some of the stone tools are extraordinary, this large blade and this very unusual uniface. They're also bringing quartz crystals, large ones, so I thought, oh, it's raw material for making stone tools, but also small ones. You can collect quartz crystals right outside the cave, but it takes an effort, and they're carrying them back there. They're also bringing little polished pebbles, whether that's geological or intentional human behavior, I'm a little unsure. They're also bringing ochre and specularite. Specularite is an iron-rich mineral which produces a sparkly powder. And in this case is a piece of specularite that shows clear evidence that it's been abraded to create a powder. I think this is specularite from a secondary context. Some of you might know that there's a specularite mine, a later Stone Age specularite mine in Postmusburg. I don't think they're mining this material, but they're going after unusual materials. They're bringing it with them to the back of the cave, and they're leaving it behind. It does not look like a normal occupation area, but there is normal residue. There are animal bones, stone tools. They're also bringing a lot of flat slabs of ironstone from the front of the cave. That's the most common artifact type we have. So Horowitz and I have argued that there's something going on here with attention to a remarkable place and remarkable things. This is well before any evidence for incised objects, for symbolic behavior. And what we've argued, and I've continued to kind of try to develop, is that what we're seeing here is a stage in human evolution where you're paying attention to the sensory properties of things and places, and that then symbolic behavior builds on that it doesn't come out of nowhere, that this attention to material and place is fundamental to humans. I'll just say this picture, which is just phenomenal, was taken by Jane Wilkins, who had done her dissertation with me and was in Cape Town for years before moving to Australia. Finally, in closing, I do want to say again this point that this is an amazing repository for research. I haven't touched on some of the areas we work on in terms of climate and whatnot. It's also an incredibly powerful place in terms of local heritage values in terms of beliefs about sinkholes in caves. It's also a place that's of great tourist value, that it's a great place to visit. Unlike many caves, this is a very safe cave, but we were having some difficulty in terms of the walkways that existed, not keeping visitors away from the cave walls, so we were getting defacing of the rock art. And there were also some risks of collapse that would have caused very, very serious injury. So Sarah and the McGregor Museum, together with our team, collaborated with Craig McClanahan, an architect in Johannesburg, on a project to build a new walkway. Uh, this was, I think, a very successful project in building a walkway that extends through the entire cave and is 100% reversible. There's not a bolt or anything driven into the wall. It's completely appropriate materials. There are debates. A lot of people say, well, this has removed some of the natural value of the cave. This is something especially people in the community in Kuruman say to me is this was a mistake because it violates this sense of walking into a cave and feeling in this pristine environment. And there's some truth to that, but there was no way to leave the cave as it was while safeguarding its heritage values and its research values. And I think this gives you an intense feeling of moving through the space. It makes the site very approachable and very safe for school children, for visitors who come through the site. And whenever lockdown finishes, I do hope that some of you have a chance. It's a very long drive, I'll admit, but it's a very beautiful area of the country in an understated way. And the site is really a wonderful place to visit, in large part because of the sensitivity that Craig brought to this job. And it was really also great collaboration between an architect, the research team, the museum, and Sarah. So I feel quite good about that. I feel like an American political candidate. Please visit our website, www.wonderwerkcave.com. It's a little out of date, actually. It needs some updating, but there are links to all kinds of publications and media coverage and whatnot. And it can give you some access. And I don't know why I like this picture, but I really do. People tell me it's a little gloomy to end a talk with the darkening skies. But this is some of the great drama of working in the Northern Cape are these wonderful storms, particularly when we're there in the summer, with these cloud formations rolling in. And it's a chance to thank our funders, which include the Canadian Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, grants to both myself and to Francesco Berna, National Science Foundation, or Wenner Gren Foundation. I should add the Leakey Foundation, and in recent years, a very important contributor to our research and training aspects has been PAST. And then to David Morris and the staff of the McGregor Museum, including their employees who live at the site year round, for the years of dedication, support, and collaboration. Okay, thank you. It's very strange not seeing you, but hopefully there's some responses. I think some of the members of the team are on the chat, so if there are more detailed questions, I can send them their way. So, Nick, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Michael. That was a wonderful, fabulous talk. Yeah, I've never been to Wonderwerk myself, and it's one of the sites I've desperately wanted to go to. So I'll add that to my list the next time I'm up in Kuruman. Yes, so we've got a few questions for you from the audience. We had a record number of viewers today, or members who joined. It's 80, I think, was the
Wow.
total count. So it's well over double the number of people we normally get at a talk, which is fantastic. So your first,
Scary as the word.
no, not scary at all. It's exciting. So we have a good question from Ross Nightingale, who was curious about the rock that the flintstones are made from. So he's keen to know what it's made of, and then We had a Maxine Davis who joined, and then Matthew De Beers was the second question. He was interested in, this is a more complicated question, how do we know that the stratums were not disturbed by the early inhabitants, so that when we think fire was in stratum 12, they could have been buried from later years? So let's start with those two questions.
Yeah.
What was the rock made from? I think you addressed that earlier on. And then
Yeah.
how do we know that the stratums were not disturbed? And then we'll move on to some other questions that are coming up.
Yeah. So the your two strata that you have of rocks to work with are the dolomite and the banded ironstone. There are also igneous rocks in the area. Um, they're patches of volcanic rocks. And we find actually all of those are used. I kind of simplified a bit. The banded ironstone fractures very well, not all of it, but some of it really is excellent. It ranges in quality. And we haven't done a great study yet of the variation across. Jane Wilkins started some of that work of looking across the whole formation. It's quite a daunting task to see what types were they selecting in different periods. They use cherts that come from the Dolomites, particularly in the older one. And we have one or two hand axes on igneous rock, which are quite interesting because they recall forms that we get in the Val River. Um, the last one is kind of weird, and it's been very distressing, is that we're finding dolomite artifacts. Dolomite is kind of chalky, and the distressing part of it is telling the difference between an intentionally fractured dolomite rock and just a broken dolomite rock is a bit tricky. But we're definitely finding it. So they're definitely, and that's something we overlooked, or I overlooked in analyzing the material from Peter's excavations. It just never occurred to me that they would be working that material. So they're basically working everything that's there. Um, there's no great evidence for long distance transport at this site. Um, in terms of the burial, I really appreciate that question because there's a real need to be skeptical about claims, and particularly claims that tend to treat archaeological sites as kind of chocolate layer cakes, kind of just these pristine layers. Where all of us, now I work in my garden because I have nothing better to do these days. Uh, there are worms, there are burrowing animals, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And can't that mess you up? And the answer is absolutely yes. So Francesco Berna, who's done a lot of the geological work, also works with Paul Goldberg, who was his mentor and is an expert in micromorphology. He's worked all over South Africa as well. And what Paul does is he looks at the stratigraphy, not at the way that you and I would in terms of I see one layer and another layer, but really at the millimeter layer. And there you're seeing actual processes of levels building up. So he can clearly see when there's a burrow. It's very obvious at the microscopic level. And we can see where are there areas that we have to be very careful about making interpretations. In the area where they identified fire, it's very clear we're fine, that we have very, very clear laminated kind of stratigraphic or microstratigraphic sequence. So that I feel really pretty confident with. That part doesn't is not a huge concern. There are all kinds of technical concerns that do affect the work, but the sense that it could be later Stone Age material kind of working its way down doesn't seem to be possible. Yeah.
Excellent. Tim Maggs has a question. He
Oh,
says hi as well. He wanted to say hello, and he wanted to know whether you could say something about the current thinking on the shape and formation of the cave. Was it formed by an underground river, hence the linear shape? In which case, it went from somewhere to somewhere. So that's his question.
yeah, yeah. No, thanks, and hello. So um, Paul Goldberg's sense is that this is what you call a phreatic tube. So it's a buried river. and then uplift of the mountains basically exposed the entrance. Um, but your point is the larger point is I'm always asked, well, what are the limits of Wonderwerk Cave? Is the end the end? There's a little tunnel off to the side. Peter was amazing. He would just go on about how we have to dig that tunnel out because there were stacked up bodies just like out of Puerca. And he was probably right because he was right about everything, but we haven't gotten to that yet. My sense is if you look at the Chat Plateau, it's dolomite and it's being dissolved by water in these massive, massive systems. So, for example, we have uh, Bosmanschat, which is just a few kilometers away, which is the deepest sinkhole in the southern hemisphere. I forget how deep it goes, but it's very, very deep. We have the Eye of Kuruman in Kuruman, which disgorges enormous amounts of water. There are all kinds of stories about people who've walked into the Eye of Kuruman. I've not done it. You can go on for a kilometer or so. That sounds a little optimistic, but there are other people who say it goes to Botswana, which it goes in the wrong direction. So I don't think that's likely, but it goes a long way. So the point is that what we call these karst systems, these dissolved systems of limestone, go on and on and on. And I suspect that Wonderwerk, it's the same, that there's a lot of um, buried karst that we can't see. And the question is, how could you image that or see it or get at it? And we had an interesting experience last winter, where company, and I'm just blanking on the company name at the moment, has developed a special kind of ground penetrating radar that's used in the mines to look for, when they're going to work on a rock face, they want to see fissures well in advance. And we started using that to see if we could see empty chambers behind what now looks like solid stone wall. And it looks like there may be. So I don't think that linear line of Wonderwerk is the end of the story. It's just that the back of the cave is as far as you can go at the current level we're at. That maybe if you dug far down, you'd find a continuation. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And that's why I say thousands of years from now, people can probably still be working at this place.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, we have one more question from it's Belinda Mutti and Andy Smith, I'm sure, in Grayton. And they've asked, what do you infer the use of the ground or grooved specularite was for?
Okay, well, so I'm sorry, I forgot to mention Ian Watts, who did the work on the specularite and ochre. Um, and Ian is amazing because Ian is, some of you might know his work at Blombos. He's incredibly obsessed with ochre. His email address is Ochre Watts. So he's obsessed with ochre and he studies it in great detail. So it was great to have him work with us. And his reasoning is as follows: that he thinks that that at a certain stage in human evolution, females formed coalitions to deceive men. Now, if you want to, the article's on our website, so you can download it. I can't explain all of the logic of this, but the idea is that at a certain point in human evolution, women were deceiving men so that men didn't just choose to mate with the most reproductively fit females in terms of age. And I apologize if any of this is totally insensitive or, and they would carry out these rituals, and it was kind of ritual menstruation. They were rituals to deceive men and to scramble the signal that menstruation would provide of who's fertile and who's not. So Ian actually thinks the back of the cave was some kind of ceremonial area where people were painting their bodies, dancing. It's really quite spectacular. And for all I know, he's right. My imagination is a little more restrained, so I don't quite go uh, I'm not quite as sure. What I don't know what they were doing. And one thing we haven't looked at yet is the use of fire in the back of the cave, which I think is important. But what for me is going on is whatever they're doing, it has this sense of this place and these things are powerful. And that's something that I like a lot because it continues today. Wonderwerk is a powerful place to me as an archaeologist. It's also a powerful place to people in Kurman. I think that sense of, wow, this is really unusual. And if you go into Wonderwerk at night, it's um, it's eerie. In the back of the cave, you sit there with the lights off, and you're almost floating in space. It's a strange feeling. And when you walk out, if you spend half an hour or an hour, whatever, you walk out, the stars are so bright, and you start to think, how would people experience that? And I gave a talk once in Washington State in the U.S. Oh no, in Oregon. And a guy came up to me later at the end and said, "Do you know that if you bang quartz together, it makes a spark, a special, not a combustion spark, but a blue light?" I said, "No, I never heard of that." But we tried it, and it's true. And you bang these quartz pieces together. We don't bang the archaeological ones, once we picked up. It's incredible. You see this blue light kind of spark around. So I kind of like to imagine that it's something to do with a sense of the unusual or the powerful. Um, but Ian's idea is also very intriguing in terms of the processes of human evolution and how that would work. So it's really worth reading. What I've described is really a poor kind of phrasing of the theory. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, well, that brings us to the end of the talk. I think that those are all the questions as well from the audience. Thank you, everyone, for making your inputs. And I'm sure some of you didn't manage to ask a question, haven't quite figured out the chat feature yet, but that's okay. Please send us an email, or you can comment on our through our secretary if you're struggling with the chat feature. But Michael, thank you so much. That was
Well, thank
a
you.
wonderful talk. I've learned a lot about Wonderwerk, and I'm sure many of our members have also learned a lot about a site they've probably never been to. Some have, and yes, I hope this everyone enjoyed it, and we've certainly ironed out some of the bugs from the first round of using YouTube Live. I think it's a good format and it seems to be working quite well. And yes, we look forward to many more talks. And I wish I could give you a bottle of wine to say thank you, but we'll have to give you a virtual bottle of wine. That seems to be the par for the course in South Africa for the most part, whether you're in Cape Town or not. But have a lovely day for the rest of it, and thank you for everyone who came along for the talk to view it.
No, thank you very much. And I just want to wish everybody to be safe and well through these times.
Take care, Michael.